What's up, guys? Welcome back to the channel. Today we are talking about UFC fights that, if they went the other way, they would have changed kind of the history of the UFC. And these are the oldest one I have on here is 2016. I'm not talking about what if Frank Mir beat Brock Lesnar the second time or anything like that. This is about kind of the modern UFC history, and like I said, the first one is 2016. And speaking of that first one, it is Tyron Woodley versus Wonderboy Thompson, the first fight where it ended in a draw. This is one of two draws I have on here, and obviously nobody likes a draw. The UFC surely doesn't. They need to that basically guarantees a rematch, because especially in a title fight, I mean, you got to figure out who's the champ, who isn't, because I mean the whole thing is about being undisputed, and if it's a draw, then there's a pretty strong dispute, So I think that if Wonderboy won this, he would probably have defended the belt against the same people Tyron did, which next was Damian Maia. And then next after that was Darren Till. I think Wonderboy probably would have defended against Damian Maia, and maybe Robbie Lawler would have gotten a shot because he was the champion that Tyron beat. But either way, I think Wonderboy would have been. It would have been awesome to see him as champion. Is the first thing, He's one of my favorite fighters, just in a very unique style. So seeing him as champion would have been awesome. Tyron would never have been in the conversation for greatest welterweight of all time. And, and who knows, maybe we wouldn't have seen the downfall of Tyron Woodley, Obviously, after this, he fought, like I said, Damian Maia and Darren Till, but then he lost to Usman, and then that was kind of history. He went on like a 4 or 5 fight losing streak, and then boxed and got knocked out pretty embarrassingly. I don't think this would change history too much. I mean, Kamaru Usman would still get the title shot eventually, and I think we can all agree that he would beat Wonderboy. But we would have had Wonderboy as a champion, and that would have been awesome to see. Would have had awesome on his resume, just kind of round out his career as like a great striker, as a great combat sports athlete. So that's number one. Number two, and we're going kind of in chronological order, so we're going from 2016 to 2018. And this one is Derek Lewis knocking out Volkov in the third round of their fight. I mean, this one is interesting to think about, because when you look at like where they were in their careers at this time, this was basically a number one contender fight. I mean, Derek Lewis, I think, was ranked number 2 at the time. Volkov was around top 10. Volkov was winning like a very convincing decision. He looked really good, and if he won, he would have gotten a title shot, because that's what happened with Derek Lewis. He won this fight, and then the next fight he had was against Daniel Cormier for the title. He was headlining a pay-per-view, so I mean that could easily have been Alexander Volkov, and it would have been very interesting to see. I mean, Volkov's probably the tallest opponent that DC would have fought, and it would have been very interesting. And I mean, we saw DC have trouble with John Jones, who's obviously very big, very tall. Volkov probably wouldn't have beat DC. I mean, just look at his fight with Curtis Blades. That's kind of the game plan, to have that happen, and that was a couple years later. But it would have been very interesting to see like DC against a big, tall heavyweight who had really good striking, and like he's a strong striker, and we saw what he did to Sergey Pavlovich this year, about how he dominated the distance and everything. So I mean, it's not out of the realm of possibility that DC would shoot and get clipped by something, and we could be living in a world where Alexander Volkov was the guy who beat Daniel Cormier and was the heavyweight champion. So, and then that would set him up for fights against like Stipe and all that stuff. But, I think this would have just been funny more than than history changing. If Volkov won, then he'd be a title challenger. He would have had the chance to become the champion instead of Derek Lewis. And Derek Lewis kind of would have been, he might have fallen down the rankings a bit because, I mean, he was getting pieced up by Volkov in that fight. So to see that happen, maybe the UFC would always keep him around. They like him a lot, but I mean, he would probably be hanging around down in like near the 10 spot instead of up in the top 5 like he was at that time. So the next one after that one, we're going again from 2018, jumping forward 2 years to a pretty obvious pick. This is Jon Jones versus Dominic Reyes. Don't have a ton to say about this one. I mean, we all kind of know what was going to happen if this fight went the other way, like it should have. Jon Jones lost this fight, as you guys will learn about me if you watch my videos, is I'm a big Jon Jones hater. So I of course think that Dominic Reyes won this fight, but I mean, we all kind of know what would have happened if this fight went the other way. I mean, Jon Jones would have lost. He would have lost his not so perfect record that Dana White is probably going to make perfect at the end of this year. And, you know, Dominic Reyes would have been on a crazy title run. He would have been 13-0. He would have been, his wins would have been pretty impressive, honestly, in the UFC. He would have knocked out Jared Cannonier, future title challenger, Ovince St. Preux, former title challenger, Volkan Oezdemir, who's been around forever, Chris Weidman, which is whatever. I mean, he was pretty over the hill at that point, but still former champion. And then he would have fought Jon Jones. You know, Jon Jones probably would have gotten a immediate rematch after that, but he also couldn't have. Like, he could have, because this was around the time where he was thinking about moving up to heavyweight. And if he lost, does he go up to heavyweight anyway? Like, does he go on a loss, or does he try to stay at 205 to try to get that back? And that kind of opens up other possibilities for fights for him in 205, which we'll talk about in a minute here. But I mean, I think if he loses to Dominic Reyes, there's no chance anybody considers him in the GOAT conversation. I mean, one of the big things he has over a lot of the other guys like GSP and stuff and Anderson Silva is that he's never lost. I mean, he has, but because he cheated and broke the rules, but that's what everybody says. They say he hasn't lost a real fight. So that would all be gone. Dominic Reyes, you know, would have gone on a crazy title run, 13-0. And then who's to say he doesn't beat Jon Jones in the rematch? And then he starts building his own legacy. He fights basically the same guys that he did after this fight for the belt, Blachowicz, Prohaska, and hell, maybe we even see him fighting against Alex Pereira if the butterfly effect doesn't blow this whole thing up. But speaking of light heavyweight and a potential Jon Jones fight, we're going another year in the future to Jan Blachowicz versus Israel Adesanya. This was, I think we all kind of forget. People forget, man. People forget about how much this kind of changed history. I mean, Izzy at the time was 20-0. He had never lost a fight in his MMA career. He was on top of the world. He goes up to light heavyweight. He sees like blood in the water, no Jon Jones in the division. So he goes to fight Jan Blachowicz, who he thinks is probably an easier fight for him. And it isn't the case, you know. I mean, Jan Blachowicz was on a pretty solid run after he lost to Santos in 2019. He hadn't lost a fight. He had fought 5 times in like a year and a half, and he beat some really good guys. He beat Luke Rockhold, Jacare, Corey Anderson, Dominic Reyes for the title, and then he beats Israel Adesanya, And I mean, some of those guys past their prime. Luke Rockhold and Jacare had no chins at that point. But I mean, it was an easier fight for Izzy than it was if he tried to go fight Jon Jones. And obviously, Jon Jones is big, and Izzy only weighed in at 200 pounds for this fight. So But if Izzy won this fight, like we all kind of thought he would, then Izzy kind of does the Alex Pereira arc before Alex Pereira even hits the big leagues. He's weight division champ. He's undefeated. He's on top of the world. And then he was calling for the John Jones fight at the time, which, especially after seeing Izzy lose to Dricus this past weekend, like what a crazy fight to think of that almost happened. Like that fight almost happened. But either way, Izzy would be a 2-weight division champion. He'd be undefeated at that time. And, that puts him pretty squarely in the GOAT conversation. And then he gets to defend against, maybe the UFC cherry picks some matchups for him. Maybe they don't give him Glover like Blachowicz took that fight after Izzy. He fought Glover and lost. I think Glover probably beats Izzy, and we still get 40-year-old Glover as the champ. But I think it would be really interesting, and this could have led to an Izzy versus John Jones fight. If John Jones stayed at 205, he could have fought Izzy, and that feels so far out of the realm of possibility now. But that could have happened. And for Blachowicz, he turns into like a one and done champ, and his legacy's kind of whatever, because beating Reyes for the title, cool, but defending it against Izzy is really impressive. So we'll stay on Jan Blachowicz with his next title fight, or his next vacant title fight against Magomed Ankalaev. And this one is less about the actual fight itself, but more about the kind of fallout after it. So like I said earlier, this was the second draw on here. And instead of what happened with Woodley and Wonderboy, where it held up the division, this one, they just kind of moved on and acted like it never happened. So this fight directly led to Jamal Hill fighting Glover Teixeira for the belt, and in Brazil. And we saw, Jamal Hill probably have the best performance of his career and retire Glover and become the champion and put himself in the mix for all the drama and everything that has happened with him. And it got him to main event UFC 300 which is crazy to think, like I know a guy who fought Jamal Hill, and to know that he he main evented UFC 300, like supposedly the biggest card of all time, is crazy. So that wouldn't have happened if one of these guys won this fight. They would have been the champ, and then they probably would have defended against Glover, because Yuri had vacated and was injured, so they probably would have defended against Glover, and just kind of put the whole division, like kind of slowed it down, instead of having 2 title fights in 3 months or something like that, and with 4 different guys involved in it. And if Ankalaev won, then Alex Pereira would have had to fight him. He probably would have still fought Jan for his debut, and then instead of fighting Yuri for the vacant belt, he would have fought Magomed Ankalaev, which is crazy to think, because we're in the world of Alex versus Khalil Roundtree now, and not getting the Magomed Ankalaev fight, which we all are interested to see. So this one is very interesting, and maybe even if Jan Blachowicz won, and maybe Alex's debut fight in 205 is still against Jan, but it's for the belt. So this one, very interesting. The fight itself was very interesting. I haven't really talked about any of these fights, because that's not really what it's about. But this fight itself was very interesting, and I kind of wish that we saw one of these guys win and become the champ, and it would have changed the landscape of light heavyweight, and also what happens in the UFC. There wouldn't have been, like I said, there probably would have been a different UFC 300 main event, which is crazy to think about. And the last one, also in 22, is Cyril Gane versus Tai Tuivasa. This one is really crazy because I don't know if people realize that if Tai Tuivasa won this fight, he would have fought John Jones. Like, that's basically where this hardcore analysis ends, you know? Like, Cyril Gane won this fight after losing to Francis, and then he fought John Jones for the interim, or for the new title, for the vacant title, a couple months later, like within the next 6 months. And if Tai Tuivasa won, if he won that fight after he knocked down Cyril Gane, that would have been him, you know? It would have been John Jones versus Tai Tuivasa, and I don't think the result would be any different. I don't think Tai Tuivasa was going to beat John Jones if Cyril Gane got absolutely mogged by him. I mean, there was no way that Tai Tuivasa was going to beat him. I mean, he's not skilled enough to do that. But the point being is, we could have lived in a world where John Jones' best win and only win at heavyweight was Tai Tuivasa, which, looking at his record since this fight, is pretty ridiculous. You know, he's gone on a tough losing streak after this fight. Well, including this fight, he's lost 5 in a row. And, you know, if he fought John Jones, I mean, that is just a crazy thing to think about, to say that John Jones's only win at heavyweight was Tai Tuivasa. So that's my list. Let me know what you guys think, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.